once again, a warm welcome to today's webinar, the deep dive into the end of ads, the rise of creators. My name is Josef Lentsch. I'm the founder and CEO of Partisan and the Political Tech Summit. And it's my pleasure to welcome two outspoken experts who are Patrick Frank, who is the CEO of Lunda, and Sandor Madovy, who is the founder of Amplify. Good. Welcome to you two.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Fantastic to have you. Perhaps before we dive into it, Sandor, do you want to tell the audience what Amplify Good does? And then also, Patrick, perhaps you want to give a quick intro to Lunda. Sandor.
Yes, thank you, Josef. So very briefly, at Amplify Good, we help campaigns, NGOs, brands, clients, mission-driven brands to reach people through real voices, not paid ads, as today we will discuss in detail. And I'd like to start just with two data points that I think will be very interesting throughout today's conversation. On one hand, 4 people out of 10 today get their news on social media. I think that's a very telling number. And as I've read in Edelman's Trust Barometer, 63% of people trust influencers more than brands. So I think that's why authentic creators can be utilized and should be utilized, especially when we want to create content that feels real and authentic. And basically, this is what we do and help organizations to do.
Thanks, Sandor. Patrick.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm an American, but I'm living here in Vienna. And for the first time in a year, I'm slightly more proud to be American today than I was yesterday, now that we won a few elections last night. Here in Europe, I work with progressive parties and organizations to help them do crowdfunding tactics and better understand the audiences that they're working for. Thanks for bringing up those stats, Sandor. I learned those stats myself from TikTok, where I get my news. So it marks true. Lunda is our donation platform. You can check it out at lundadonate.org. And then, we also offer lots of strategic advice if you like your tool, but you want some help anyway. But I'm really excited about this topic specifically, Josef. So thank you for having us both, because this is one of the great opportunities of our lifetime to do something in Europe much better than what we've seen around the world for democracy. And it's both terrifying and exciting at the same time to see ads go away.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive right into it. So just to recap things very quickly, and if you want to have a more detailed dive into this, of course, you can watch our past webinar on TTPA, but of course the new regulation as a let's say a side effect of it, Meta and Google stopped paid political ads, and the whole game in a way changed for them. It wasn't let's say a big business, but of course for political organizations like parties, unions, associations, and others who used political ads for their campaigning. That means that, of course, they have to question their budget allocation and potentially shift it. Now, of course, this is all very, very new and fresh. So to kick things off, Patrick, I know you've looked into this also. Can you give us your perspective? I know you're not a lawyer, so we won't rely on your legal advice. But from your perspective as a professional and as someone who is into this, what's the state of play? What's the state of political ads, and what potentially can we expect over the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the state of play, most people have stopped doing ads. And I think we just had the election in the Netherlands, which was a good example. And from all the tracking I saw, there was a mix. The great thing about the Netherlands is you get to have 17 different approaches to the rules all at the same time, given how many parties there are. Some of them ran right into the deadline. Others pulled back beforehand. But it looks like this is being enforced. The era of political ads is, for the most part, done. I think there's still a lot of experimentation around loopholes. There's a couple bad actors out there in Hungary named Orban, still trying to run lots of ads. But in general, it does seem like this is going to be the new norm. I would be surprised if this isn't something that we see replicated around the world and not just limited to Europe. And for those looking for loopholes, I would just say, I don't think this is just about policy. I also think it's that social media is less fun because of ads about politics, and the platforms themselves are incentivized not to bring these things back. It's just not enough money for the boringness. So I think we should all operate thinking about a post-ads world, especially for acquisition and persuasion. And for my money, the big takeaway of what you should be thinking of is don't slice the budget off and say, hey, we were going to spend this on ads and now let's swallow it back into our normal budget. Keep that budget where it is, solving the tasks that ads were, but reallocate it to people like Sandor who can try different tactics with that same budget, because there's going to be a tendency to try and cut that down. And I don't think acquisition or persuasion are going to be less important tomorrow. It's just going to change how we do that.
Thanks. Before I come to Sandor, Patrick, you're working with progressive movements and organizations, you said. Can you see that shift already happening? Have they already started? Are they already starting to reallocate budgets in the way that you mentioned?
A little bit. They're certainly taking it away from ads. And I think right now everybody's trying to figure out where that goes. The straightest line, and I'm so glad that you're here, Sandor, because otherwise I'd be talking about you in absentia anyway, is with the influencer and creator pathways. Because in many ways that is the same as ads. You're just breaking it down. You're getting rid of the middleman, and you're making it more organic. Where I would say most parties and organizations are right now is in the brainstorm phase. And I won't go into what that entails yet. I'll save it for the right question. But I think there's a process every party should be going through right now that I'm eager to talk about in the next hour.
Fantastic. And by the way, for the audience, of course, as always, if you want to ask a question or if you have a comment or a thought, the Q&A is open, but also the chat is open. So please don't wait for us for the final 15 minutes. Jump in at any point. I'll bring you in as quickly as possible. Thanks already for contributing. Sandor, you work directly with creators.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if everyone in the room has experience doing that. So can you give us a little bit of an insight what that means, working with a creator? How do you do that? How do you then, potentially develop this relationship over time? And what can they actually do? You already mentioned some impressive numbers. What can it do that ad potentially can't?
Yeah. So basically, just touching upon what Patrick said, I think organic content becomes more and more important in this noisy environment. And what we see is that there are at least two very distinct approaches that are starting to unfold. One is prioritizing quality. And this is about either very polished content, very, very nice and high production value, or there's this very, very high volume and quantity of content that is being churned out with the help of creators. These are tricky questions, who would opt for which one, but when it comes to creators, I think there's one very important distinction between Europe and the US. When you think about the US and creators, you think about, at least this is my impression based on the conversation we had with clients, is that this has to be celebrity influencers. And it's a very different context when it comes to the US when compared to the very fragmented context of Europe, where you don't necessarily have those celebrities. It's a fragmented continent because of language, because of scale. So at Amplify Good, we worked so far in 7 countries, and we collaborated with local voices. And what we found out works best if you focus on people who have certain impact, digital footprint, followers, but who are really value aligned, who can be authentic, who can explain the story that is really resonating with the message of the given organization. So let me give you an example. I believe that most of us here in the call probably have a social media account. If you think about these social media accounts, there are a number of factors to be considered. One, what kind of content do you really consume? Because that already tells a lot. What do you really follow? What kind of issues you follow online? And then the second question is obviously, what kind of content you post about? So what is that you are vocal about? And these are two very important telltales about someone. So let me give you an example. In a country, we mapped creators who we believed have a stronger tendency to reflect on social issues, specifically healthcare-related subjects. It was very important for us to have these people impactful in terms of their followership, but we did not prioritize large influencers who are influencers as a main profession. It was more about people who have some sort of followership, but they certainly have an opinion. This opinion resonates with the movement we wanted to support, and they can have strong influence in a specific geographic area. This is what we usually do. We map and find key opinion leaders who are, if we would talk about commercial values, probably they have a limited commercial value compared to a large influencer, but they have a really important political value due to their authenticity. So just as an example, in this context, we were ending up finding people who were vocal about the social security system and healthcare. And some of those people were actually working as nurses or doctors, talking about that specific issue they cared about. The materials they created were really authentic, very engaging, and I bet you that it was quite high value compared to a generic ad that we would post. So I think the whole story starts with understanding, do you really have common values with that particular opinion leader? If yes, are you able to nurture a relationship with them and convince them that they should amplify your message?
Thank you. Now, I don't know if you have those kinds of numbers, but do you have an idea how the reach of and the engagement that creators produce compared to ads?
Yes.
So, and also in terms of potential return on investment, either financial or the time spent on this relationship building and so on. How can you kind of put this in relation somehow? You both are nodding.
Sure.
I don't know who wants to go first.
This is probably apples to pears, but let me just give you an example. Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most valuable social media brands, if you take, I mean, he's a soccer player, Patrick, but the point I want to make is that he doesn't really make huge engagement numbers. It's not really an authentic creator. But obviously, if you want to have a reach, you might prioritize celebrity creators. But in Europe, where again, language, cultural context, lots of details depend on these factors. I think a local creator with maybe just 20,000 followers can have an engagement rate of close to 15 to 20%, which is quite outstanding to any metric. And more importantly, these people usually take the effort and interact with the people who interacted with their content. So they can comment, there can be discussion, we can further monitor the discussion. So there's a quite high potential of growing this into a real conversation. Let me give you another example. I think that's a very interesting one. Just out of curiosity, we took a look at the social media profiles of leading French politicians. We took one French politician, he has hundreds of thousands of followers. Assuming that most of the followers are value aligned, obviously not everybody, but let's assume that most of them are value aligned. With the available tools on the market, or almost anyone can do this, we are able to identify the followers who actually really matter because they themselves have quite a big followership. So in this particular example, the leading politician of one party with 600,000 followers had 11,400 people following him who themselves had at least 5,000 followers each. Now, there's a lot of overlap, but I think it's safe to say that starting with a data-driven approach instead of the classical influencer agencies approach who have just basically a good Rolodex and call creators, I think one can go quite far.
Thank you. Can I ask here, because you mentioned 20,000 followers, right? Kind of, is there some kind of logic or taxonomy in terms of, so, you know, when I looked at it last, and this was a couple of years ago, anyone below 10,000 followers on most platforms was seen as a kind of a micro influencer, and you know, so that was the magic number. Are there any kind of levels that you basically apply, or is there kind of a
Yes.
magic number where below you would say 500 followers not interesting, or even though it's only 500 followers, it's as you just said, those are so impactful context potentials. How do you actually measure that and assess that?
Yes. So for us, the threshold is 5,000 followers because that's the nano layer nowadays. But let me give you a specific story, which is very interesting. We announced a public call for creators to join a social movement. We scouted lots of creators, but we also made a public announcement. We described the campaign and we told them that if they want, they can apply. This case happened in Portugal. And we got, I think, dozens of creators who did not make the cut in terms of follower base. They were below 5,000, but they wrote us that, hey, I really care about this issue. Can I post? Can I join? I mean, who in their sane mind would say no? And these people eventually, and I think this is also very important, these people weren't necessarily really good amplifiers in terms of their impact, but they were really impactful in two things. One, they still can create content that they can volunteer over and hand over, testimonial videos that can be used as a resource for campaigns. Obviously, this is very situational and depends on the agreement, but very, very authentic. And the second thing I would like to mention is that these people themselves have a network where they can point to other creators and tell them, hey, I just joined this community. I believe that this is really valuable. Do you want to join? I think Patrick can testify about this, that social organizing in this regard is also very important and can be useful.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump on that. And just thank you to Marcos for the question in the chat as well. 2 gold stars. Everyone should be asking questions. And I want to address that. So first of all, I think what you just heard from Sandor is the work of a scientist. And that's why you should hire Amplify Good. You need the scientist in the room. But I also want to make sure that we understand the art question here. And I want to say it in a mean way, because he is not a magician and the tactics are not magic, right? So if you imagine the exact same spend to the exact same influencers from 2 campaigns, one Andrew Cuomo and one Zoran Mamdani, which one of them is going to get more engagement on the platform is not a matter of did Amplify do their job, right? This is only about creating the space for your message and your campaigns and your leaders to build their profiles. What I would say is this. So, one of the unique things about being an American and coming in and doing email fundraising in Europe was I went through this incredible learning curve where when I showed up in Europe, I thought, oh my God, I can't do my job. Just GDPR is just such an obstacle. What do you mean you need opt-in to get emails and you can't just like buy them off the back of a truck or, get people really aggressively? It must be impossible. And within about 6 months, I realized I had it completely backwards. And right now the US ecosystem is going through a crisis because it doesn't have GDPR. And everyone on this call that runs an email program probably is used to seeing 40, 50, 60% open rates in their email. And there isn't an American politician alive that is seeing that. And that's because of GDPR. And so I see this challenge as a very similar thing. And I swear to God, Marcos, this is an answer to your question. It just doesn't seem like it yet. Marcos's question was about how parties' own social media cloud and follower base influences this, right? And here's what I would say. Here's where the art comes in. It used to be that you could segment out the science from the art. So you had a leader that said, well, I don't know anything about social media or these ads or this acquisition that we're doing or whatever. You guys spend this money, get my message out. I'm going to talk about this stuff and we'll meet somewhere on election day. That era is over. We all have a much more limited resource situation that we're in, but it's a huge opportunity to skip the lost decade of US list building based on pure ads and churn and burn, and instead create something much more sustainable. So what I would do, and what I recommend every party to do, is sit down and make a long list of everywhere that you currently touch voters. And that includes the politicians' social media, the party's social media, flyers, billboards, events, speeches. When are you in front of people? Because that is now the most important resource on a campaign and is the resource that has to be spent on building your list, on inviting people into your movement, into your walled gardens, whether it's your WhatsApp channels, your social media following, your email list, whatever it is, because that's the only way you're going to reach those people. And so now that conversation needs to come together. It can't be fragmented anymore. It's not a good thing if you've got a leader who gives a speech and won't say the website at the end of the speech and say, come join us. When you're posting on social media about a certain issue, it should say, join us, with a link to a sign up form or a petition or some sort of funnel in order to bring people in. And so what I see, similar to GDPR, is that this aligns our tactics with our values. Because every party on this call has gone through this experience where they're like, we need to keep social media influence out of our country, and don't trust Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. They're evil and they're bad, but here's a bunch of money for them because we need them. And that era is now over. Now we get to live our values. So it's really important that we connect these things. And so, what Sandor's talking about is, again, it's part of the science. It's one of those tools in your arsenal, but there won't be a silver bullet. It needs to be a comprehensive approach that says in every message, in every flyer, in every billboard, in every event, we are thinking about how we invite people in. So I'll give you one example that I love, that I haven't seen yet, and that I'd really like to come to in a given city that I'm visiting, which is, hey, instead of spending money on ads, we're going to host a happy hour. And everyone who comes in and signs up on the email list, check with your lawyer. If you sign up on the email list, you get a drink ticket. And now we're creating this physical space where we can come together. We're having an event, but we're also using it to list build. In many ways, the more we advance through, politics, the more it's coming kind of full circle. I got my start on the Obama campaign as a field guy, and the first job I ever had was meet with as many volunteers as possible, hold one-on-ones with them, and ask a few of them to host house parties. Then go to that house party with 20 people and explain to them why canvassing and door knocking and making phone calls is important, and sign them up for shifts. This is a snowflake model. This is how we built the Obama campaign. We need to get back to the snowflake model. We need to get back to this idea that actually our local parties and our regional parties can be engines of bringing data to us instead of relying on national to bring in big data from above. So in many ways, this is liberating in terms of it aligning our values and our tactics with our goals. But you have to understand that from the high level as the party so that you're not stuck in that meeting, Marcos, where you're going, well, we talked to some experts and they said it matters what your social media following is as an individual. Maybe, but that's only one answer. And if you've got different ways of getting at that, if you've got other things that you do, those matter just as much. So my answer to your question very broadly is yes, and. So yes, you should care about that, but it's not the only thing you should care about. And in general, you have to go through this brainstorm process. You have to understand where people interact with you. And I'll say this one last thing and then pass back to you, Joseph. Think about, like, everyone on this call, I'm sorry, but we're all weirdos. Like, we're obsessed with politics. We think about it all the time. We're in this moment all of the time. Most people that read our emails or see our social media posts are doing that in passing. We're lucky if we have 1 minute of attention from people a day. And even then, and I know this from some of you, you're probably sitting in your office like, oh my God, we can't email more than once a week. That would be so intrusive. And it's like, no, it's like 10 seconds of their time to check an email. And so we're all in this position where we need to step out of our bubble and step into the lives of ordinary people and understand that we're competing not just with other politics, but with sports, but with news, but with family, but with friends, with video games, with everything that happens in life around us. And whatever those brief moments that people spend thinking or stressing about politics in, those are the places where we need to reach them. And this is why Amplify Good is so powerful, because it's this opportunity to reach them in their organic social media post environment of not, hey, I'm going to your website or I opened your email, but I got half an hour to kill before the kids come home from school. That's when I'm floating on TikTok. And an influencer who I listen to because, and I'm telling on myself here as a defense of your thinking I need you to explain Cristiano Ronaldo to me. One of my favorite follows right now on TikTok is a guy that's growing his hair out until Man U wins 5 games in a row. And if that guy pivoted and went, by the way, don't forget to join the Labor Party email list, it would like hit me as this weird discordant message that actually sticks. And so this is why this organic approach is so valuable. And you should be thinking about that in all aspects of your campaigning. Nobody in your senior staff is left out of this mission.
Thank you. I can be that guy with the hair, unfortunately.
You've been growing it out.
I could do it in other ways.
Just, you know.
Let's try to get into the mechanics from what you said, Patrick. Let's say, you know, let's stick with this kind of big hair guy for a moment. Now, Sandor, you said, right? So 5,000 is like the lower bound, let's say. Of course, I would expect the big hair guy to have more followers than that. But how, you know, if I think that this guy might be a good ambassador for me, how do I brief you and how do you brief him? Can you give us some insight into the kind of the game that ensues for them, for him then to say, all right, I'll do it. I'll ask for Labor or Lib Dems or whatever it might be. I'll do that for you.
Yes, in my experience, there are 2 questions that we have to answer when we collaborate with any content creator or opinion leader. What we would like them to talk about and why do we believe this is important and relevant also for them, but we shouldn't really tell them how to tell it, because they are there because they are able to tell their whole interpretation, how they want to explain the world to their followers. It's all about them. And I think here comes this very big tension that you have to give up some sort of control, or you have to be certainly flexible, or you have to invest lots of time to build trust in order to explain arguments to the creators, simply because this is how the new attention economy works.
Thank you.
If that was an answer.
Thank you.
And plus so, one on that authenticity point. You don't want to script this for people. And this is the biggest shift in politics. I'm about 40. So those of you who are my age or older will understand this. But in the 90s, you had to stay on message. And if you let your message slip, they'd find a clip of you saying the thing that you weren't saying on TV and say, see, this person's full of shit, right? And it's the opposite now. If you're always on script, nobody believes you're a real person. There's a moment in Hillary Clinton's book, which I didn't read, but I've read the paragraph, about talking about her second debate with Donald Trump. And if any of you remember this, because I'm sure you all watched this horror show, he like loomed over her. It was like really creepy. And he's just like standing over her. And she writes in her book that she had a decision to make. She could stay presidential, stay focused on the camera, answer the question and ignore him, or turn around and be like, hey, can I help you? Like, your chair's over there. And everybody over the age of 40 I know is like, well, she had to be presidential. And everyone under the age of 40 is like, oh my God, that would have been hilarious. And I would have believed she was a person. Be like the young people. Be authentic. If you are authentically boring, be authentically boring. Nobody's saying like, do something crazy to show that you're off script. If you're just a really boring person, lean into that. The best performing emails that Bernie Sanders sends are 3 pages long about detailed healthcare policy with no jokes and no breaks, followed by a donate button. And they do really well because anyone who's met Bernie Sanders or seen him on TV knows that, like, if you ask him how his day's going, he's going to tell you about income inequality, right? So you just have to let people be themselves, and you have to be yourself. And the more you expose an actual authentic voice to people, the more they're going to be able to react to that. It's okay, especially when you're dealing with influencers. Like, nobody thinks that influencer is going to write their healthcare policy. So if somebody's kind of off color, if they're off the wall, if the brand doesn't fully fit with you, and you're getting attacked by your opponents being like, look at their supporters, I have seen no data over the last 10 years that says voters care about this.
But can I jump in here? I mean, there must be a point where, you know, going creatively off message becomes problematic, right? When you basically have to distance yourself or have to react in some ways. Of course, you know, if it's kind of a light going off record, you might react with humor or not at all. But if it's more than that, you know, if the kind of the big hair guy then in the next video suddenly says, you know, Keir Starmer sucks. I don't know. How do you deal with that? So you know, how do you balance this authenticity with basically staying at least, you know, partially on message?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a challenge, and you know, politics is a full contact sport. But if the argument your opponent wants to make is some young person on Instagram isn't politically vetted enough to talk about their life in an honest way and their opinions, then you've already won that argument. So, you know, as a party in that case, you just say like, look, we don't control this person, right? This is a normal person expressing their viewpoint. My guess is a lot of followers might share that viewpoint. They might disagree with them. You as the party or the leader can easily say, I don't agree with everything this guy says. I mean, for one thing, I'm a Liverpool fan, so, you know, you can distance yourself from that guy really easily. But like, it's if they're going to try and tie you that way, they're not going to be very successful. Think about the very far right parties in Europe and the success that they're having and the people they're tied to and the amount of effort that the left and the center have put into saying, these guys are too close with X or Y or Z. Ultimately, none of that seems to be showing up in the polls, right? And so ultimately, you are responsible for what you say. Now, if your candidate goes completely nuts and says something wildly off message to the party and needs to take responsibility for that, that's true, that might happen. But if it's a supporter or an influencer, and the only tie to the campaign is you ask them to tell their truth about an issue that's important to you, I think you own that criticism and you say, okay, look, we're going to get attacked no matter what. At the end of the day, if somebody, imagine the voter is my real advice to parties on this. The voter's like, yeah, no, I'm convinced by a lot of the things you said, but that kid who looks like he's 24 with giant hair who said, by the way, support this guy because of this healthcare bill, but hates Keir Starmer. Nah, guess I can't support you now. like that's just a really hard voter profile to imagine in your brain. And you should always be asking yourself that question when you're worried about the negative consequences of letting people have your message, which is, what does that voter actually look like? How are they actually deciding? And is the gain from reaching into their audience, even in a sideways way that comes with some risk, larger than the risk that some voter will associate you with an influencer who said nice things about you and disqualify you based on that?
Thank you very much. I saw Marcus posted another interesting question, which I want to bring a little bit later, about financial disclosure. Sandor,
Yeah.
can you perhaps give us some insights from your practice, kind of when that happens, that there is this tension between authenticity and potentially being problematic for the actual brand, whatever it may be, of the political organization. How do you deal with that as the person, so to say, in the middle?
Yeah, I think this exactly touches on the point I wanted to make. It's a very big difference between you paying influencers who live or make a living because they are influencers, or you collaborate with people who have online impact, a footprint, and are value aligned. If there's a transaction, obviously you have to comply with the rules. The influencers who are making a living of being an influencer have protocols for that. Obviously, this is quite straightforward. Although I have to say that this slightly, in my experience, slightly differs country by country. Also, the attitude of influencers, if they want to disclose. And the second thing I would like to touch upon on Marcus's previous question that Patrick has answered eloquently, but I would like to say something on this. You asked whether should political actors focus on organically building on basically what they have as their own social media clouds. Yes, I think we answered that part, but there's one interesting phenomena that I'm really, really eager to make a bet with any one of you, that I think we are going to get into an age where we will slightly copy the corporate world, because in the past 2-3 years there was a very interesting phenomena in Europe that there became a trend of employee influencer or employee creator, where employees of an organization are being, let me say, utilized on an online feed in order to humanize the brands. I think that this is not necessarily the case I would like to reflect on in the political context, but campaign influencer can be a thing where basically a campaign operative who understands the message anyway, who is close to the values or is close to the party, is basically telling their perspective on why they are doing the work. I think there's a lot of untapped potential within party structures.
Thank you.
And I would say,
Patrick?
like, these are not mercenaries. So you should follow whatever the disclosure and the funding laws as you can. But again, it's a trap to attack you on that, because now they're talking about a process argument about the election that is hyper specific and very technical. And they put the influencer in a position where they can be defensive and say, I'm being attacked because the party is actually investing in content creation from its supporters. But to be clear, I'm here because I believe in this message, right? That's where that authenticity comes in. So yeah, if you go to a influencer who is just a mercenary and have them read off of a script your exact website text, and then somebody's like, they're just paying, this is just, a bot army basically of real people, then you're more susceptible to that argument than if you let them say it in their own words and create that content. So again, kind of to get back at what you were just saying, Joseph, like, yeah, we paid this guy and yeah, he went a little off message. That's a real person, right? And anytime you can get your opponent to be focusing their very limited attention and very limited energy, because they're facing the same ecosystem you are, trying to attack you on process, they've lost.
Yeah. There's another very interesting question from Tariq. Thank you very much for that. Sandor, have you collaborated with influencers living under authoritarian rule, and how does that game potentially differ from democracies?
Well, I can say that yes, we did, and it's super difficult because obviously lots of creators don't want to speak up. So I think it's way, way more difficult to, we call it, activate these voices. That's where, as Patrick was referencing it, my science nerd self comes into play, because you need to look harder to find those voices online who are willing to speak up. But then again, this is still very tricky. Is that the Hungarian flag, Patrick? It is very tricky, because at one point they are putting their necks on the line. So I think you have to have an honest conversation. Hey, are you willing to do this? It should be your call to make. This is really not necessarily working if the relationship is very transactional.
Thank you. Can we talk about metrics? And I think this all relates again to the science part. Now, we have, as you said, Cristiano Ronaldo, who has like 70 billion followers, and then you have the big hair guy who has 5,000. How, what kind of metrics are there established in the markets, and are there any benchmarks that you can share, in terms of what's kind of when an influencer works, so to say, what does that mean? And what can I expect as someone who approaches them either for a transaction or for a collaboration? What should I be looking for?
Yeah, so I think the honest answer is that currently I believe that most people look at output metrics and not impact metrics still when it comes to campaigns. So they look at how many pieces of content were created by influencers, what kind of views did we reach. This year, we reached 250 million organic views without spending €1 in 6 countries with creators on a number of social media platforms. And all I can say that there's no standard answer to this. This differs from country to country and even platform to platform.
Thank you. So not one number that we can take away, unfortunately.
Not. It would be,
But we
it
have
would
to
be
really
great
look
and it would
at
help a
the
lot, but
details.
it doesn't.
Great. Thank you. Let's talk about the opportunities and risks. Patrick, you already talked about the US, and of course the last election has already been called by some as the podcast election, because podcasters have become so influential. Now Europe, as Sandor said, is not in this situation yet, potentially. So do you see now with TTPA and everything else, Europe moving a bit in that direction, that we will have more of that? And also relating to Marcus's question, what does it mean for accountability and transparency when there are now the influencers that you pay, and that potentially don't disclose that. So yeah, what's your take on that? Do we go into that direction, and what does it mean also for ethics?
Well, that's a tough call. I think every party needs to live its values. So, if you're, again, there's the legal question and there's the ethical question. And as consultants, we tend to skip the ethical question and focus on the legal question, because it's your ethics, right? So it's sort of what you're up to. In terms of your broader question about where we're headed as a society, and like the podcasting election and all of that, I mean, broadcast isn't coming back, right? It's not, people aren't going to give up their phones. Social media isn't going to get smaller. It might continue to become more and more fragmented, and that's going to be more and more of a challenge. And on the one hand, sure, there's no European-wide podcast network that's the same. But at the same token, again, each of your countries, you don't need that European-wide focus. You need to be where your people are. And again, like I always want to bring this back to the voter and say, what does their day look like? Where are they spending their time? Where are the areas you already cross streams with them? Where are new places where you can cross streams with them? So the happy hour idea is, hey, they're already going out on Friday for a beer. Can we meet them there? Where are the different places we can meet them? So If there is a local podcast that gets some attention from an audience that you're seeking, go there. If there isn't, don't. If you are running a campaign in a very tiny country, a physical event might be able to capture a large audience. If you're in a very large country, that's probably not going to be the tactic. But rather than thinking about this as like political tactics and like what do we do and which tools do we do, and like from that mechanical perspective, it's really important to think about it from a, who is your target audience? What kind of voter are you seeking? Oh, you need more young people? You all think you do. Do you actually? But if you do, if you need more young people, where are young people? Where are they spending time? Like a great example is, and I don't like him that much. Oh, shoot, this is recorded. I love him. I'll vote for him. Gavin Newsom isn't my favorite US politician, but like he just goes on Fortnite and starts talking to, Twitch streamers and other people. And he's like, hey, Governor of California here. And like, he lets them troll him. He lets them ask him questions, but that's an audience. And then that gets replayed on TikTok, on Instagram, on all these other platforms. And look, sometimes he sounds really dumb, but like, I bet most people can name him in the US, which is like half the battle. And so again, there's no real wrong answer to putting yourself in those spaces where people are, and you have to find where they are. What you won't do, and this is something I think Sandor can speak really eloquently on, what you won't do is create that space, right? Everyone wants to be the people like, well, our party's going to have an app and people are just going to show up there. Unless you're Barack Obama or Peter Magyar in Hungary, it's not going to happen. Everyone else, you're going to need to meet people where they are, and you should be thinking from the back, not from the front on that.
Thank you. Before we come to Sandor and also to Susanna's great question in the chat, can I bring in Akif, who also raised the issue that fits here? Now that, of course, the TTPA has regulated, paid ads, the next or potential next logical step would be if people now shift to influencers and the money, they reallocate budgets, then of course the next thing to regulate are influencers, right? And so what would you're looking into the glass bubble, Patrick, and
Sure.
also Sandor, would you expect this to happen, that there will be a kind of an influencer regulation?
I think if there's a real problem with influencers being bought and reading scripts, that eventually you'll see disclaimers come in, like always. I think we're a ways off from that, especially when it's organic. But if it's paid, I'm not opposed to an idea of like, by the way, the influencer got some money for this. Like, I think it's messageable. I think you can work around that. One great advantage I have in my career working in electoral politics is that I don't have to answer the China question, because if you don't have a democracy, I'm just not the guy you need. I'm not very strong. And despite being an American, I don't own a firearm. So I don't really have a solution for non-democracies. And if free speech is restricted to that degree, like, look, this could happen. Elon Musk is already doing this subtly in your algorithm. He's already making sure that voices on the left and center are quieter than voices on the far right in his platform. And that's a different issue. That's a free speech issue. That's a democracy issue. It's a freedom issue. And it's why you need to win your elections and protect democracy, and why Josef and I, even though we come from different party family worlds, have become such close friends, because we both value democracy, freedom of speech, and the public forum. And so while those things exist, we're going to have all these techniques and tactics to do that. But if we start getting into the place where Orban jails influencers or platforms ban people for political speech that is not hate speech or violent speech or anything like that, then we need to go to a different playbook.
Thank you.
And
Regarding the
touching
playbook,
upon,
Sandor, you want to jump in here?
if I may touch upon that, I think this is obviously some sort of gray zone, but I think what we need to also reflect on that when we discuss influencers, this is just a part of a larger ecosystem of content creators. And I think there's a new category of content creators raising and taking over, especially TikTok. And these are creators who create content without their face being shown. And obviously, lots of people talk about the AI slop, which can be a subgenre of this, but I again want to emphasize that there's a group of creators, there's a number of real influencers in the country, but there's an endless capacity of people who can actually create content, and they do not necessarily have to show their face. And we do not, I feel that we still do not realize in Europe what this will bring to the online discourses. And jumping on Susanna's
Thank you.
Question, I think here, again, if the person, there are two things, what do they consume? We can look at that. And what do they post about? If these are two indicators, based on that, you are quite safe to assume that that person is concerned about certain issues. I think if the approach is about politics, that's a too vague term. People care about issues. And if you frame this whole outreach to them about a particular issue, I think that can help in terms of activating them, pulling them in. And on the second hand, I have to say that if that person is an influencer, an up-and-coming one, I think they do not necessarily care only about money. Beyond money and beyond doing good, it's also getting new audiences, tapping into new audiences, and just feeding them with content suggestions, thematic suggestions. That can be very useful. Let me give you an example. In a country, we run a program where we every morning sent out news briefings to creators. And we told them that it's not a must for you to post. It's not a must. But if you signed up, here's a curated list of what's happening in the country, thematically arranged. This seems to be something that you might care about because of your recent history. And sometimes they decided to post content, sometimes they didn't. Eventually, 75% of these people posted voluntarily content that they felt is relevant, trending currently in that particular country, and they wanted to share their opinion about it. These people like to tell their opinion. That's a very, very important intrinsic motivator. Again, jumping back on what Patrick said, these are not ads. You have to give up some bit of control. We have to learn this sometimes the hard way, but eventually I think this is where we are moving.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, one, you can make up the gap in the financials there, right? And you can just sort of directly pay people based on the content that they're producing. So that's obviously one model to get people to do it. Two, I'd say content creators in general and active social media people, in my experience, are always jonesing for more content because it's a never-ending cycle of needing to put something out that's relevant. And if your issue and your politics is relevant to people enough to be sexy content and exciting, then you won't have that problem. So I think, like, yeah, almost no amount of convincing is going to get someone to post something positive about Andrew Cuomo. But it doesn't take much to get people to talk about Zoran Mamdani because they also want to touch the sun, right? They want to be part of this conversation that's happening outside of that, which is really great. And so, I don't think it's about, hey, do this out of the goodness of your heart, but I also wouldn't discount that we're talking about real people here. And, if there's one message that I always have for people, whether I'm talking about small donors or persuasion or anything, it's people are way smarter than sometimes we think they are. People make individual decisions. And if you're struggling to get people to care about your boring politician who is 70 years old and isn't saying anything particularly interesting, then that might not be a tactical problem. That might just be an honest reality of this. One of the examples I always give is when Joe Biden dropped out of the election and Kamala Harris became the nominee. Joe Biden was raising about like $1 million on most of his emails, which seems like a lot to everybody on this call. But when Kamala Harris took over, she raised $80 million in like 24 hours. it was the same staff sending the exact same emails, literally word for word, to the exact same list, and it did 80 times better. And it's because people aren't stupid. So if you're struggling to connect, you have to understand, again, this is not paint by numbers anymore. You could kind of artificially do things in the past because you could just pump money into it. That's not going to work anymore. What you need is, and this is why, oh, what a good name you came up with for Amplify. You can't make the message stick, but if the message is sticking to one person in front of you, you can amplify it to thousands of people. But if you're sitting there with that one person and they're like, God, what you're saying is stupid, boring, and I don't care, that's still going to be true for 1,000 people. And your content creators aren't going to want to produce that content because it's not going to perform well. So we cannot expect the tactics to do this for us. The only thing that we can say is that when your movements are connecting, there is still a pathway to grow that reach from within that context.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sandor. Thanks, Patrick, for a very interesting discussion. As always, we'll have the recording and the summary also ready for you in the next newsletter, which will be published on Tuesday. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And also, we have another great highlight this week, which is the webinar on the Dutch elections, which brought some interesting results, which will be tomorrow, 12:30 to 1:30. You can still register. It's free. So use the opportunity and hopefully to see some of you tomorrow lunchtime, then 12:30 as well. But for now, thanks again, Sandor. Thanks again, Patrick. Thanks again for the great question, very engaged audience today. I wish you all a great evening or a great day, and hope to see you soon again. All the best.
Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.